have a really, this is, I know it's the last topic of the day before we get to our great demos. It is one of those topics that kind of brings a lot of this stuff together and keeps everyone on track when thinking about how your business is perceived by Wall Street, how your business is perceived by investment bankers, which are Wall Street, but VCs, the whole thing. What is said behind closed doors. My conversations with Lora, who's coming up to speak. It was honestly a cold call that came in, and we were just sitting there talking. And the more I spoke with her, I thought, this is something that our attendees need, and it was really important to me to kind of fill out that void, and it was honestly something I wasn't even thinking about covering. So we're going to get the inside scoop from someone who really has the ear of many buyers and sellers. So I think it's going to be really valuable. On top of that, please pay attention to the material she provides, and she'll give you some other insights into that. She is, Lora Lindsey is the Managing Director on Healthcare Information and Media at DeSilva+Phillips. She joined the company in 2011 to cover their healthcare information and media practice. DeSilva+Phillips is a leading merger and acquisition advisor to the healthcare media, communications, and digital technology industries. So pay attention. Thank you. Welcome, Lindsey. Clicker, just green forward, red back.
Green forward, red back. Oh, cool. Hi, I'm Lora Lindsey, and I'm an investment banker. I got to say, investment bankers are a little bit like lawyers. And to that end, I would agree with Jack of Qualcomm in his comments earlier. If you're going in to defend yourself in a small claims court, you definitely don't need a lawyer. But I wouldn't recommend representing yourself in a criminal trial. So to that end, what we have put together for you in your workbook materials and also in a Box.com account that we've created are materials that will help smaller startups raise capital themselves. We've put together buyer's list, methods of valuation, general industry rules of thumb, and a selection of downloadable legal documents in Word that will help you with your templates going through your Series A. So I encourage you to check out the materials, use them as I would have used them for you, and good luck with that. So I guess, what exactly do I do? Digital Health Chessboard, what's your next move? I cover a space that I define as the health information and media, so I'm a HIM banker. What that means is that it's the intersection, companies that fall within the intersection of healthcare and information and media, or use information, content, and the distribution of that content to improve our healthcare systems. This is really important because I spent most of my life on Wall Street, either as a healthcare banker at Goldman or as a media banker, information banker at Bayer. So one of the things that we have noticed as we've looked through about 250 deals that have happened in this space within the last 18 months, and of the 60-plus conversations that I've had with buyers in this space, is that it's no longer about competition within the individual ecosystems. Now it has evolved in the digital health space with intra-ecosystem competition. So you as companies, as you are growing and managing towards an exit, need to think about which ecosystem are you a part of, and understand the investment theses and the strategies of those companies that are buying in those ecosystems. And that's kind of what I am hoping to talk to you a little bit about today in terms of case studies and also the 5 trends that are driving M&A, therefore your exits, that we've identified over the analysis. So here we go. So the first primary driver that I would like to speak about is clinical intelligence, driving information materiality. Basically, data-driven customization has created the ability to microsegment your customers and to microsegment the data. So you've got this data liquidity. When you combine with that the analytical capability of technologies that you all are developing, you find that you have a greater amount of information materiality. So what exactly does that mean? What that means is that with all of this information going around, people are now starting to take decisions, also to take action on data. So, for example, historically, when people made decisions, they would make decisions based on experience and perception. And this is why advertising has been so important throughout our history. Nowadays, with the increased information materiality, people are also able to access the other side of their brain and take decisions based on data, on raw facts, not only alone on perception. And what this means to you as you're growing your business is that if people are taking decisions on both of these things, you can have predictive intelligence. And predictive intelligence gives companies the ability to take action. Why do we care about predictive intelligence? Because if I know what you're going to do, I can influence your behavior. And therefore, I can create a business. It's all about audience ownership and influencing business. So when we look at this, we say, okay, so what does this mean from an exit standpoint? What are the buyers saying? Why are we even talking about this? If you look at some of the acquisitions, you see Aetna made an acquisition of Payflex for $202 million. They also bought Medicity for $500 million. So they've been on quite an acquisition spree. We also have PerkinElmer making 4 acquisitions in this space in 2011 alone. One, CambridgeSoft for $205 million. So as you're growing your business, I would say, number one thing, know your ecosystem and focus. Because eventually, even if you plan on owning the entire world through an IPO, eventually you're going to have to exit some way. You've got to manage, you've got to plan where you're going to, otherwise you're not going to end up going anywhere. So from a case study standpoint, 2 of my favorite cases to talk about are both Athena Health and Optum Health. These companies have been really embracing this philosophy and trying to use that to change our healthcare system. So Athena, the 2 common things between Athena and Optum is that both of them have product categories that are very low margin, but are a big significant portion of their business. And when I was speaking with these strategy groups at these companies saying, why exactly would you have this, I don't understand, why do you need to have, a 4% margin business when the rest of your business is a much higher margin, why do you keep that around? Both of them said it's because of the data that we're getting from that. So if you can own the data and you can own the analytical systems, you can have that information. And that information is power. That's what's defining the digital ecosystem arms race, because people are using that information in order to capture a greater share of the wallet. So the second primary thing that we've seen driving M&A and therefore exits in value is marketers are really redefining their roles. It is no longer good enough to be just a plain marketer, a plain advertiser, to send information out. Now people are being demanded on that they need to actually bring the information back in and prove their worth on a day-to-day basis. This has actually been very interestingly reflected with, not just in the M&A world, but also in a pure sales world. If you're looking at some of the healthcare digital out-of-home companies, they are getting pressure increasingly from pharma to say, okay, show me, who are you selling my advertising to? Which doctor's offices are they going into? And what's my return on investment? And with this additional ability to micro-segment, they're saying, well, I don't necessarily want to be selling into, the top 20 doctors. I want to be selling into the top 5 prescribing oncologist offices. And I want to be showing only this amount. So what does this mean? This means we're getting extremely targeted orders coming in. And so as you're developing technologies for these platforms that you can sell to these platforms, you got to think they're under tremendous pressure to show this ROI, to show very specific and actionable data. What can you do with your company to create that for them? Because that is what's going to drive up the value of your business when you go to sell it. So what I've put up here is the FOG behavior model. I discovered this, oh, nice motivation, okay. I discovered this FOG behavior model several months ago when I met Sunny Vu, who personally I think Sunny is one of the smartest guys out there. He's a person who gets it. And when I looked at this, I thought, they should be teaching this in business school. They should be showing that, when you look at trying to motivate behavior, if we've got predictive intelligence and we say, okay, we need all these adherence programs, the first thing I'm asking myself is there high motivation and is it easy to do? Healthcare, yes, there's high motivation, but there's a different kind of healthcare. Because remember, there's the illnesses that affect you on a day-to-day basis that are not necessarily actionable till the very end, such as cholesterol. You don't feel it, you don't see it. So yes, it's very important to manage it, but it's not top of mind. And then there's erectile dysfunction. Very, very actionable, top of mind constantly. So that would be in the high motivation. Easy to do, really important as well. You make something complicated for people, just something as simple as some of these internet applications and apps that we're developing. If it's too complicated to integrate into your systems, people just aren't going to do it. And so it's very important to think about. So some of the deal flow that we see coming out of this, looking at patient, education, adherence, for example, Remedy Health, buying IntelliCare Compliance. It's a mobile medical adherence technology. They also purchased Health Central. So you're seeing marketers actually look out and see how can I improve my ability to affect behavior. And not only are we seeing marketers do this, but a lot of the pharmacos, I should say a lot of the M&A groups at large pharma are sitting down and talking with me about adherence, about patient education. They're saying, look, we've got this money, we want to spend it, we want to do the right thing. If we can just get people to take the drugs that they're being prescribed, it's going to benefit them. And if there are companies that are out there that are novel and addressing things in a way that we can measure, such as gamification types of companies, we want to know about those and we want to be talking to those people. And so I would say that this is probably the number two driver of M&A in the market right now. So the third driver is accountable care legislation. All of us are having to deal with a lot of legislation, both with the High-Tech Growth Act and the Accountable Care Act. Accountable care is driving, I think, probably one of the most interesting things of big data and analytics companies and payments processing companies to say all of a sudden, we need to have a healthcare division. The largest acquisition last quarter was by Verisk Analytics Health. Verisk Analytics, which is a typical big tech analytics company, has a healthcare platform. They spent $350 million to acquire an integrity property. As I'm looking out over the landscape of companies that are selling, if you can have something some way in your business plan that deals with the issues of integrity, it gets people very excited because it's a big issue that's not being addressed. So, I guess, what does this mean for you? That means if you're taking decisions strategically and you're focusing on a particular ecosystem, ask yourself, where's the leakage? Where are people losing money? And if you can solve those problems, that is going to drive your valuation. If you have a technology or a business process that helps with integrity issues in all of the different ecosystems that we're looking at, you really can make a strong argument for valuation, especially when you take your technology and layer it on a platform that is as big as Verisk's is. So, I guess the fourth observation that we've made looking at all of these deals in the last 18 months is a very strong trend towards integration across the continuum of care. So what does that mean? We have a lot of EMR companies that are out there. It's a consolidating market. People have accepted that it's going to happen, and so now the question is now what? And so with revenue cycle management is probably in, it is in 2011 the largest and most actively acquired space. So a question that I would pose to you and that buyers would ask about is, okay, you've got this great technology, this great company, you want us to pay you for it. How are you going to integrate it? How does it fit into our existing ecosystem? And so as you're taking decisions, take a look at what your best buyers, your potential buyers in 5 years are doing, and think about, once I get to that point, how will my business integrate into their business? I want to say that, recently I was speaking with the head of strategy for a very large platform that has been extremely acquisitive. And they went out and they've purchased, 5 different companies within the last 18 months. And I was like, so how's it going? You've spent all this money, you've made a big splash, how's it going? And quite frankly, the biggest issue for them was how it was dealing with the integration of all of these different companies from a technological perspective. So it wasn't the people, it wasn't the social issues, it wasn't the synergies. It was like, we got all these computers and all this information, all this data, and they're not talking to each other. And it's a real big pain to get these guys to talk to each other. So this is something that is top of mind for these buyers. And it is a gating item if you're thinking about selling your company. Because if your system is on a closed system, or if for any reason it's not easily integratable into existing systems, it is going to be a gating item that will be in their investment memo to their committee saying, pros and cons. Con is we've got to budget this much money to invest in this company for the integration. And integration issues are becoming a lot larger than we actually even realized. So one of the examples of a deal in this space that happened in the last 18 months was ADP, making an acquisition of AdvancedMD for $205 million. And that I found, that actually raised my eyebrows, because I'm like, payment companies going into this. It makes a lot of sense. You go to the doctor's office, you make payments, they want a piece of the action. So I guess the fourth legislation, the High-Tech Growth Act, not only funding the creation of EMR systems or EMR adoption, but it's also financing workflow integration. Okay, and so finally, our last analysis here, our last thing here is the capital overhang that's right now in this country is huge. And it's fostering healthcare business model evolution, but what does that mean? First of all, in case you don't know what capital overhang is, I'm going to just describe what this is. This picture, this graph, is describing to you money that is out there waiting to be spent on companies. If I'm a private equity person or a venture capitalist, I am paid on the money that is invested. If I have not invested that money, I have to give it back to them, give it back to the investors, and I don't get my 20% on the money that I invest. So this is very important. This means I'm under pressure to find decent, reasonable investments that I can convince my committee to adopt in order to spend my money so that I can get paid the 20% on that. What this chart shows me is that there is $425 billion that has been put into the investment community that has not been spent. And of that, approximately $76 billion has to go back to the original investors just in this year. That's what vintage means. You have a certain amount of time to invest this money, and if you don't invest it, guess what? It goes back to the investors. And so what this tells us there are a lot of people out there that really, really want to give you their money. They're very motivated because you know what? Their paychecks go significantly down if they don't give you their money. And all they need is you to help them to convince their committees to give you that money. So as an example of what's going on with the healthcare business model evolution, you've got really smart people with way too much money trying to figure out how to spend it. And One of my favorite case studies here is Inventive Health. I think it's a fascinating, fascinating company. They have, originally Inventive Health was something of a marketing type of healthcare agency. It was purchased by T.H. Lee for about $1 billion. So T.H. Lee comes in, spends $1 billion, buys this company, fires everybody, and brings in the Thermo Fisher guys. These are really smart guys that understand the world of pharma. Their investment thesis is to solve all of the pain points of pharma, meaning everything from, clinical trials, finding people to go through clinical trials, tracking the data, go-to-market decisions, marketing the drug. So everything pharma does except own the drug. They will never own the drug. And their investment thesis, and the reason they've made so many acquisitions since this, they're approximately now, insiders would value them at around $2 billion. And this is in a very short period of time. Their investment thesis is that if they can use data and analytics and create information, they can take the go-to-market decision from phase 4, which is that's after you spend a ton of money, because for those that don't know in the audience, phase 3 is your most expensive period. They're trying to take their phase 4 go-to-market decision and move it to the beginning of phase 3. Because if you can do that, if you know, look, we've got a drug, it's efficacious, but under accountable care, it's not efficacious enough in order for us to get reimbursement, then you can save yourself millions of dollars by not even going through phase 3, which I think is brilliant. And, this entire concept and financing of this business came because T.H. Lee had a lot of money, they needed to make it work, and so they got creative. And so this is something, that I would encourage you to think about is, as you're evolving your business models, as you're talking to companies, private equity firms, think as big as you can. These guys have a lot of money to invest, and it's very difficult for them to give you $100,000, to give you $1 million. In fact, the minimum equity checks, many of these, the middle market will write is $5 million. It's a lot easier for me to work on a $20 million sale than it is to work on a $1 million sale. Why? Because they've got huge overhead, and they've got a lot of money to invest and only limited time to invest it. And so, I guess I would encourage you to think big. And in cases where you are not or cannot think big, think about what other platform roll-up strategies are going on in my market, in my ecosystem, and how could I potentially become what is called a bolt-on? Meaning when a big PE firm buys a platform, or any of the strategics have their own platforms, they usually call them innovation groups. When they have this, how do you fit into their ecosystem? How can you help them do their job better? So as two of their acquisitions I brought as data points in the last 12 months would be Nginx i3 for $400 million, and then Kforce that they just purchased for $50 million, and that's Inventive. So those are the 5 primary drivers that we've identified behind all of the deal activity that has gone on in this space. One thing I want to leave with you is that, right now when you talk to buyers, their biggest concern is this company focused? Are they solving my problems? And am I willing to buy into whatever problem they're solving is actually going to be a real problem? With all of the regulatory issues that are out there right now, there are several buyers that are taking a wait-and-see approach. Will the Sunshine Act ever will it ever really be enforced? There are a number of companies out there that are solving issues around the Sunshine Act. They're having a hard time raising capital because there are a number of buyers that are sitting on the sides. And so when I talk to buyers, I'm like, look, right now you've got limited competition for these companies, but once the definitive answer is made, once we move into 2013 and people know more where we're going, you're going to have a huge flurry of activity. So if you're in one of those industries where people are sitting on the sidelines, I would say bide your time right now. Prepare yourself, do your homework, because in 2013, after there is more surety around some of the legislation and the regulation and the presidential elections, you're going to find that there are a lot more people that have to spend that money or return it to their investors. So this is my second to last slide. This is one of the slides that I have in your workbook materials that I encourage you to go through. These are your primary buyer hot buttons. I put this together because your business plans, as you reach out, as you address buyers, you really need to think about what are they concerned about and how do I summarize it to them in the shortest form possible. I would highly encourage you to create a deck that is no longer than 20 pages. It's very, very difficult to get buyers to look through more than 20 pages. And I'm not talking about 20 pages of text. I'm talking about 20 pages of PowerPoint slides. Be brief, concise, to the point, and address every single one of those hot buttons. Because those hot buttons, are what they're thinking about. This is what they are addressing in their investor committee memos. So with that, I'd encourage you to stay in touch. I post a lot of information on infographics on Pinterest of healthcare information types of infographics. Hopefully you can use them in your own business. I tweet about interesting deals, interesting metrics, this conference as well, and also in Crunchbase. So, once you get to the point where you're ready to work with a banker, where you're ready to speak to somebody and be consulted with about valuation and about a potential exit, I'd love to hear from you. If you have questions in the interim, please reach out. We've also created and this is in your book, a Box.com account. Please email my colleague, Jack Noble, right over there, who is going to help get you access to any of the materials you need to download and help you with your business. So thank you guys very much, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Lora, in the B2B healthcare communications sector, what qualities in a company are buyers particularly looking for?
I think they're looking for information and data. They're also, when you're a buyer, you also want to understand operating leverage. Right now, there's a huge movement, talk about being digital, and a lot of traditional players want to move into digital. And I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding about what that means. Taking your materials and putting them on a website doesn't necessarily make you digital. What digital means from an investor's perspective is that you've got high operating leverage. And what does this mean? Leverage is when you go one way, it swings positive, but it can also swing negative. So in debt, leverage can swing negative. But in operating expenses, it can also swing very positive if you're a high growth company. So if you've got a relatively high amount of fixed expenses to your variable expenses and you're a high growth company, that's high operating leverage. That's great, because that means with every incremental dollar, you get to keep even more margin. So from a B2B perspective, as you're trying to manage towards an exit, think to yourself, or in any business, think to yourself, what type of incremental revenue and business can I bring in that will give me that type of high operating leverage? Because investors want to see that if they inject a bunch of capital into you and help you grow your revenues, that they're going to get these increasing margins. And that's where you get these crazy multiples that people talk about. 10 times revenue. That's a high operating leverage company. It's not that it's just digital, it's that it's high operating leverage. As an example, an antidote. One time I was working with a young advertising agency, and they said, we have X% digital, and we were going through the diligence, and at one point I sat down with the controller, and I said, walk me through some of the transactions, that make up, this digital thing, because we're talking about doing a split up and one sales force going here, part of the sales force going there, and I just needed to understand how they were conceptualizing it. And this guy says to me, he's like, okay, well, you see this transaction right here. This is pure digital. And I'm like, okay, what was that transaction? He's like, we had an internet company that came to us and ordered a billboard. And so we went out and placed an ad for them on a billboard. And maybe this is an inside banker joke, but I'm thinking to myself, how is that digital? Just because it's an internet company, it's still a billboard. You still have X amount of expense for that revenue that came in. That's a high cost item. You don't have any of the operating leverage. And so, to go back to your question, I would encourage you, or any of the companies here, regardless of the medium that you're in, forget the rhetoric around being digital, rhetoric around recurring revenue, software as a service. Think about the basic business fundamentals. How does this generate more income for my investors, for myself? And the more that you can get on the less investment, the better of a multiple you're going to get in your exit.
I'm not really in finances. Can you explain one more time why there's $425 billion not yet invested? I can't believe that they're all waiting for the presidential election. There aren't companies with a good business model who can ask for more than $5 million in less than 20 PowerPoint slides. So are all the good ones taken? What's the story?
What's the story? This is really funny because I went to Columbia Business School, which is a big finance school, and a lot of my friends are in the investing world and private equity. And as much as the entrepreneurial community laments, why can't I just get money? The investor community laments, why can't I find a good company? And it goes back to the buyer hot buttons. So every time I make an investment in a company, I need to go to my investment committee and argue to them basically, the value. You had the strategics talk to you earlier about what they're looking for, but the value from a financial perspective of the 4 pillars. And the 4 pillars of financial investment are, what is my earnings growth, right? What is my balance sheet and what's the stability of my balance sheet? What is my short-term liquidity needs and what is my long-term cash flow? And so when you look at those 4 pillars, very often companies will fall short on one or the other. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it's a matter of, it's like dating. M&A investment is like dating. You've got Match.com out there and you've got, Jack Noble sitting out there saying, I want a redhead who's 6 feet tall and, grew up in the South. Well, finding that person is actually very difficult. It's a lot more difficult than you realize. So each of these investment companies, including the strategics, as we saw when pressure was put on our Jack at Qualcomm this morning, each of these companies has a mandate. I need to invest in companies with a minimum EBITDA of this, a minimum revenue of this, a maximum revenue of this. The check size has to look like this. It's got to be in these industry sectors, but not these industry sectors. Oh, and by the way, I invested in a company like that 3 years ago, lost some money, so I don't like that one. And so this is where the value of working with any intermediary comes into play. Is that whether you're working with a lawyer or a banker or whomever, a finder, whomever, is they help break through the clutter because there is massive amounts of information clutter. Investors get ad blindness and a lot of really great companies get looked over because they're not making the right pitch. Their Match.com profile doesn't show exactly what the investor is looking for. And so that's why it's really important to do your homework and present yourself in the most concise and perfect package that you can when you do go out to either raise capital or to sell your company. And that's what advisors theoretically should be helping you to do. And that's also one of the things you should be thinking about is if you ever do hire an advisor, ask yourself, what are they bringing to the table? Are they bringing to the table a balance sheet where they can loan you money or invest in you? Or do they have a hyper-focused, deep understanding of your market and of your best buyers and, understanding of which boys want to go out with you or which girls want to go out with a guy that looks like you. So it's like any sort of matchmaker.
Sometimes getting money is not the issue. A strategic partner is more important than actually money. And often I've heard that getting a strategic partner hinges on building syndicates. And I was just wondering how to architect that.
Okay, yeah, no, absolutely. Let me introduce a concept that, there's smart money and there's dumb money. And this is not to say anyone's dumb. What it's to say is the dumb money is the person that's ready to write you a check, but that's all you get from them. So the problem with when you're smaller, having an angel investor who is your Uncle Joe who made a bunch of money in this last boom, he doesn't necessarily have the contacts and the introductions that somebody who's smart money does. So if you work with a venture capital firm that has a ton of connections in the digital health space or an incubator or any sort of thing that is hyper-focused, you're going to get the introductions to all the people that will become your future business partners, your future clients. And so in this vein, I would like to point out one of the most exciting things that's going on in our market right now is all of these large healthcare companies are waking up and saying, I need to create an innovation group. Every single one of them. I don't think I know of a single healthcare company, maybe a few PBMs, that doesn't have an innovation group that says we. I guess I've ran out of time. So thank you very much. Please email me if you.
Time for one more question.
A quick one, go.
Okay, quick question. Can you briefly describe the process from the point that you receive the business plan, you like the plan, at that point, how many phone calls or face-to-face meetings, how many months it takes before you would fund the $20 million?
Okay. Very quickly, that is actually all of that information, the process, the timing, the valuation, that is in my workbook materials because I knew people want to know it, so I encourage you to go through it. 6 to 9 months, rule of thumb for raising capital. 6 VCs, 6 strategics. But these have to be smartly chosen VCs and strategics. So hopefully that's helpful. Thank you very much.